Well, I welcome you to this story. Scripture turned into a fiction story of based on Luke chapter 13, verse 7. And it has to do with when Jesus said to a woman bowed over with an affliction, a rather shocking thing. And it must have been heard that way to the ears of the religious leaders. Ought not this woman be loosed, be set free from this affliction? And he added this saying, being a daughter of Abraham. And that is significant. And it would have been significant to the religious leaders. Maybe not even the common Jew, but to the religious leaders, it should have made an impact and made them wonder. Okay, and in our story, it's Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea who are secretly following the ministry of Jesus, and they're always conversing upon things that he's saying. So enjoy this message. Okay, the oil lamps burned low in the upper chamber, their flickering flames casting long, wavering shadows across the rough-hewn stone walls. A faint scent of olive oil and aged parchment lingered in the air. Outside the ancient city of Jerusalem lay wrapped in a deep hush of night. The narrow streets and stone courtyards were mostly silent, yet restless whispers about the Galilean teacher, Jesus, drifted on the cool evening breeze. Inside the modest upper room, two respected men of Israel sat facing one another across the low wooden table. Scrolls of the sacred law lay unrolled between them, their edges curling slightly in the warm glow of the lamp. Nicodemus leaned forward, his brow deeply furrowed, one hand resting lightly on the parchment of the Torah. Across from him was Joseph of Arimathea, his usually composed face marked by quiet concern, his eyes shadowed with thought. For several moments, neither man spoke. The only sounds were the soft crackle of the lamp wick and the distant muffled call of a night bird beyond the windows. At last Nicodemus broke the heavy silence, his voice low and careful. "I heard it again today," he said quietly. Joseph lifted his gaze. "You mean the Nazarene, Jesus?" Nicodemus nodded slowly. "Yes, Jesus of Nazareth. He taught in the synagogue. There was a woman there bent over for 18 long years, unable to straighten herself up. He healed her, and he did it on the Sabbath." Joseph exhaled slowly, the sound heavy in the still room. That alone would be enough to trouble the council, that he did this on the Sabbath. Nicodemus shook his head, his fingers tightening slightly on the scroll. It was not only the healing, it was what he said afterwards. Joseph leaned forward, his interest sharpened. Tell me." Nicodemus lowered his voice further, as though the very walls of the chamber might be listening. He said, Ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound these 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath? The words seemed to linger in the warm, lamplit air, carrying a weight far beyond their sound. Joseph's eyes narrowed slightly. Ought not? Yes, Nicodemus replied. He spoke as if this truth should have been obvious to us all along, as if any faithful student of the law should have already known it. Not merely mercy, but something required by the covenant itself. Joseph sat back, absorbing the implication, his fingers drumming lightly on the table's edge. That's a dangerous way to speak, he said at last, yet perhaps more dangerous is the thought that we should have seen it ourselves. Nicodemus gestured toward the scroll lying open between them. That's exactly why I sent for you tonight. We must search the law for ourselves and ask, why has this not been plain to us before? Joseph nodded slowly, his expression solemn. Then let us search, and let us be honest with what we find. The soft crackle of the lamp wick filled the brief silence as Nicodemus carefully unrolled the scroll to the passage he had marked earlier. The book of Moses, he said. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28. Joseph leaned closer, the golden light playing across his face. The blessings and the curses, he murmured. Yes, Nicodemus said. If this Galilean teacher is right, then the answer has been here all along, waiting for us to see it. He traced the ancient lines with a steady finger and began to read aloud, his voice measured and clear. And it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, that the Lord will set you high above all nations of the earth. Joseph nodded. We know this passage well. Nicodemus continued, Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field, and blessed shall be the fruit of your body. Joseph's eyes sharpened with sudden focus. The fruit of your body, that speaks of healing, of health, of life, of strength and vitality. Yes, Nicodemus said, not of sickness and weakness, and yet we have read these words for years without letting them speak to the suffering around us. He read on, his tone growing more deliberate. The Lord will command the blessing on you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people. Joseph leaned in further. Read more. Nicodemus moved down the scroll and then paused. Here, he said, now the contrast. He continued, but it shall come to pass if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, all these curses will come upon you. Joseph's jaw tightened slightly. Yes, the curses. Nicodemus pressed on. The Lord will make the pestilence cling to you. The Lord will strike you with consumption, with fever, with inflammation. Joseph closed his eyes for a brief moment. Sickness, clearly listed among the curses. How did we miss that this woman's condition was exactly what the law called a curse? Nicodemus looked up, meeting his friend's gaze. Yes, and Jesus asked, ought not, as though we should have known it was her right under the covenant. A thoughtful silence settled over their reading. Then Joseph spoke slowly, weighing each word. If sickness is listed among the curses, then freedom from sickness must by necessity belong among the blessings of the covenant. And if that is so, then the question ought not or should not makes perfect sense. It was never a challenge to the law. that Jesus gave. It was a reminder of what the law already declared. Nicodemus' eyes held steady on this. That is precisely what troubles me. We should have seen this. Joseph rose and began to pace slowly across the chamber, his sandals rubbing up against the stone floor. Let us reason this through, he said. If the covenant promises blessing for obedience, and if sickness is a part of the curse, then one who stands faithfully within that covenant, a daughter of Abraham, as he has called her. He stopped and turned toward Nicodemus. Well, should she not have a rightful claim to be free from that curse? And should we not have known it? Nicodemus did not answer right away. Instead, he turned his attention back to the scroll. He said, "There's more." Joseph stepped closer once again. Nicodemus read, "Also, every sickness and every plague, which is not written in the book of this law, will the Lord bring upon you until you are destroyed." The words seemed to echo softly in the lamplit chamber. Joseph whispered, "Every sickness, even those not written." Nicodemus nodded, which means, Joseph continued, the curse covers not only the known afflictions, but every unknown one as well. And Jesus spoke as if this truth should have been plain to every teacher of the law. Yes, that's why he said, "Ought not this woman be loosed, being a daughter of Abraham?" And therefore, Joseph pressed, if one is redeemed from the curse, it would include all sickness, without exception. The ought not was not presumption. It was logic drawn straight from the covenant. Nicodemus leaned back against his seat, his face pale in the soft glow of the lamps. You see it too. We should have taught this, our whole religious order. Why didn't we? Joseph exhaled deeply, the weight of their discovery pressing upon them. The fact that we did not, that troubles me even more than his words. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The realization was no longer merely scholarly. It felt personal and convicting, as though they stood on the threshold of something far greater than their traditions had allowed them to see. Jesus had not introduced a new doctrine. He had simply quoted and taken the law for its word. Nicodemus broke the silence, his voice tinged with both sorrow and growing conviction. "Then why," he asked quietly, "have we not taught this to the people? Why did it take a man from Galilee to ask the question we should have been asking ourselves?" Joseph looked at him but offered no immediate reply. Nicodemus continued, "We have taught them to endure affliction, to accept sickness and pain as though it were somehow the will of God. Yet the law itself declares sickness to be a part of the curse, not the blessing." Joseph spoke at last, his voice low and measured. "Perhaps we have feared to presume too much upon God's mercy." Nicodemus shook his head slowly. "Or perhaps," he said, "we have simply not believed what was plainly written." Jesus asked, "Ought not, or should not?" because the answer should have been obvious from the scriptures we claim to uphold. Outside, a distant murmur of voices rose faintly through the night air. Jerusalem was never entirely silent when news of Jesus the Nazarene stirred the city. Joseph moved toward the small window, listening for a moment. "They are speaking of him even now," he said. Nicodemus rose and joined him. The cool night breeze brushed against their faces. "This Jesus," Joseph said slowly, "does not merely perform healings. He speaks as one who truly understands the covenant in a way we've overlooked. And he does it by pointing back to what has always been there. Nicodemus nodded. When he said, "Ought not this woman be loosed or healed?" he was not appealing merely to compassion. Joseph turned to face him. He was appealing to the law itself and expecting us to recognize it. They returned to the table, and Nicodemus carefully began rolling the scroll once more, his movements slower and more thoughtful. "Joseph," he said, "if this is true, then healing is not an exception to the rule, or should not be." Joseph finished the thought. "It's a covenant right, and we should have known it. Our whole religious order should have been aware of this." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. "A daughter of Abraham bound for 18 years, Nicodemus said, and we would have told her to wait, to endure. Or you never know what God will do. Bear it quietly. Bear it patiently." Yet Jesus asked what we should have asked long ago. Joseph's expression hardened, not with anger, but with a quiet awakening, and he set her free. The lamp flickered once more. Joseph placed his hand gently on the scroll. "Do you realize what this means?" Nicodemus met his eyes. "It means," Joseph continued, "that the promises and mercy of God are far greater than what we have dared to declare, and the bondage of the people far less justified than we have allowed them to believe. They shouldn't be bearing what they're bearing." Nicodemus nodded slowly. "And it means that this man, this Jesus, it's revealing what has been hidden in plain sight all along." A quiet reverence filled the chamber, and the scriptures they had studied for decades now seemed to glow with fresh understanding. Not because the words had changed, but because their eyes had been opened to what should have been clear. "We've guarded the law faithfully," Joseph said, "but perhaps we have not yet seen its fullness." Nicodemus offered a faint smile. "And now a carpenter's son from Nazareth teaches us the true depths by simply asking what we should have known." Outside, the night deepened over Jerusalem. Inside the upper chamber, two leaders of Israel sat in thoughtful silence, not as authorities this time, but as humble seekers of truth. At last Joseph asked, "What will you do?" Nicodemus did not answer immediately. His thoughts drifted back to that secret night long ago when he had come to Jesus under the cover of darkness. There was something in the teacher's words then, something he had not fully understood, but now the pieces were beginning to fit together. "I'll listen," Nicodemus said. "And I will as well, and I'll watch." The lamp burned lower still. The scroll of Deuteronomy rested between them, unchanged in form, yet forever altered in their understanding. For within its ancient lines they had glimpsed something undeniable. Sickness belonged to the curse. The covenant promised blessing and life. And somewhere in the quiet streets of Jerusalem, a woman who had once been bent low now walked upright, healed, delivered, a living testimony that what ought to be, what should be, had at last manifested and come to pass.